Agamemnon nearly calls off the entire Trojan invasion, Odysseus proves his cleverness, and we meet Achilles for the first time since Book 1. However, there's something different about him. Hello and welcome, or welcome back. Today, as always, we are going through the great books of Western civilization, beginning with the Iliad. This is Book 9 from the Robert Fagles translation. I'll begin with a plot summary, and then we will go into analysis and commentary. After dark, Agamemnon calls the Greek armies together, weeping bitterly. He commands the armies to prepare to sail home immediately, for he believes that Zeus is commanding them to do so, and that he has no intention to honor his promise that Troy would fall. All stand in shocked silence for a moment. Diomedes appears to believe that this is a test, similar to the one that Agamemnon staged a few days prior, and so he responds by insulting Agamemnon's cowardice, as well as any soldier who would obey him. He then vows to stay and destroy Troy by himself if necessary. Nestor, however, the Greeks' old advisor, recognizes that Agamemnon is sincere in his despair. Realizing this, Nestor carefully convinces Diomedes to lay off, while still communicating his deep respect for both Diomedes and Agamemnon. He then suggests that Agamemnon treat everyone to a feast, after which they will all sit down and decide on a good course of action to take. During the feast, Nestor suggests that Agamemnon go and make amends to Achilles, so that he will rejoin the fighting and push Hector and the Trojans away from the ships. Agamemnon agrees that this is the best way forward. He makes a long list of the gifts that he will give to Achilles if only he will come back and fight, and also submit to him and bow to him. These gifts will include gold, riches, weapons, slaves, his own daughter as a bride, as well as Briseis herself, with an oath, a solemn vow, that he never slept with her. Agamemnon selects 3 soldiers for an embassy to be sent to Achilles with this information. Those selected are great Ajax, Odysseus, and Phoenix, one of Achilles' teachers when he was a child. The 3 depart immediately. Upon arriving at Achilles' tent, he receives them warmly and gives them a meal. Ajax nods to Phoenix, signaling him to begin. Odysseus, however, once he sees the nod, decides to jump in and give the message himself. He explains the situation and lists all of the great gifts that Agamemnon seeks to give Achilles, but he leaves out the part where Agamemnon asks Achilles to bow to him. He then appeals to Achilles' pity, if not for the king, then for the soldiers, who have to die because he is not fighting with them. And finally, he appeals to Achilles' desire for great glory. Despite Odysseus' clever trick, Achilles infers what Agamemnon actually said, and insists that he will not relent. He will not rejoin the fighting. He shares that he plans to leave Troy first thing in the morning. After long hours of thought, he has decided that no treasure, no glory is really worth his life. He then explains the prophecy concerning his death, that he will either die young in battle at Troy, earning eternal glory, or will go home to live a long life as king of his father's lands, earning none. At this point, he says, he wants to change his choice and go home. Phoenix, his teacher, begs him to change his mind and indicates that while the Greeks are offering him a great trove of treasures for his help now, after they've suffered, perhaps they wouldn't be willing to do so. This is his only chance to gain such riches. Achilles budges a little. He will instead decide whether to stay or go in the morning. The ambassadors return to deliver the bad news, and upon hearing it, Agamemnon decides that he must lead the charge himself against the Trojans come morning. Agamemnon's tears indicate his sincerity about leaving. He isn't testing the men to see if they'll challenge him this time like he did back in Book 2. He really thinks that all hope is lost. He really thinks that Zeus has lied to him, and he really thinks that his whole campaign is a disaster. Diomedes doesn't realize this, so he insults him to his face. If this was a test, that would be appropriate. Nestor's the only one who really recognizes what's going on, which is why he refers to Diomedes as young, implying inexperienced, and invites everyone to feast before making any decisions about what to do next. He's trying to make Agamemnon feel better and clear his mind before he makes any decisions. There's a lot of truth to this. In counseling or spiritual direction or whatever, you'll often hear that you shouldn't make any huge decisions in a moment of desolation or at your lowest point. you're more likely to make bad decisions or rash decisions. I think it's interesting that a version of this wisdom is here, 3,000 years ago, in a myth. Agamemnon himself expresses that it was a bad choice to dishonor Achilles the way that he did, but he doesn't apologize or take responsibility at all. He says that he was mad or that he was blind to do what he did, but that means it's not your fault. It's a way of distancing yourself from the responsibility. Furthermore, Agamemnon goes on to prove that he isn't sorry. His demand for submission and acknowledgement as the greater man almost guarantees Achilles' refusal. As I said before, the taking of Briseis was not primarily about love for Achilles, although we'll get into that later. It was about glory. Odysseus understands this, which is why he makes sure to jump in ahead of Ajax and Phoenix to explain the situation to Achilles. He wants to make sure that they don't give the message verbatim, because if they do, he knows that Achilles will refuse. It's established early on that Odysseus is very clever, so this is a scheme that we would expect from him. If you've ever moderated any kind of argument or disagreement, then you know exactly what he's trying to do. He's trying to communicate the message in a way that the other person will be able to stomach, in circumstances where ordinarily they couldn't stand each other. Despite his caution, Achilles calls him out for concealing the essence of the message. He knows Agamemnon too well to believe that that was all that he asked for. The words used to speak about and to Achilles by Odysseus, Ajax, and Phoenix, as well as Agamemnon, indicate how godlike Achilles is being regarded as. From Agamemnon, "Let him submit to me. Only the god of death is so relentless." From Odysseus, "Take pity on all our united forces. They will honor you like a god. Think of the glory you will gather in their eyes." From Phoenix, "It's wrong to have such an iron, ruthless heart. Even the gods themselves can bend and change, and theirs is the greater power, honor, and strength. Men can bring them round, begging for pardon when one oversteps the mark." Whether intentional or not, all of these compare Achilles' anger to that of a god who they're trying to appease. It reminds me exactly of the situation in Book 1, where Apollo was driving a deadly plague against the Greeks. They're even indicating that he's more stubborn-hearted than a god. However, we shouldn't be surprised by this. As I've said before, the gods don't have much to gain or to lose. They follow their emotions and their passions for the most part. Whereas Achilles really has lost his glory, and it wasn't guaranteed to him. So he really has no reason to relent unless his glory will be restored. And is it? It's on its way. The Greeks' horrible losses from the Trojans indicate Achilles' greatness on the battlefield. Almost all of the Greek forces recognize this as well, but apparently not Agamemnon, because even when asking Achilles to relent, even when almost apologizing, he can't quite bring himself to do it. He still has to insist that Achilles bow to him, submit to him. Achilles, however, appears to have changed somewhat. He seems a little bit less interested in glory now than he was in Book 1. He's still hurt, of course, by Agamemnon's offense against his honor, but now he shows yearning for going home, maybe even for taking a wife, living a long life, even if it's unceremonious, devoid of any glory. He seems so much more aware of his own mortality. "I will marry no daughter of Agamemnon. If I reach home alive, Peleus needs no help to fetch a bride for me himself. No wealth is worth my life. A man's life breath cannot come back again, once it slips through a man's clenched teeth." To drive the point home, he says that he would not accept the offer even if it was 10 or 20 times as much as it is, and that he's quite willing to sail home immediately to gain the peaceful life promised to him in the other half of his prophecy. So remember what we were talking about last chapter, how Hector appears to be becoming more like Achilles as the will of Zeus drives him on. At the same time, Achilles is becoming less like himself, less battle-hungry, less interested in glory. This is the second transformation that we're seeing happen, and I don't think it's an accident that they're related and almost inverse of each other. All we can know for sure is that Zeus isn't going to let him stay like this forever. Does Achilles love Briseis? He professes to love her like a wife, even though he won her in battle. Despite this, he tells the embassy to go and tell Agamemnon that he can keep Briseis as long as he wants. This indicates to me that the damage is already done, means that it's probably more about glory than it is about her. He goes on to refer to Briseis as his prize of honor, just as often as he professes to love her. So, in my book, that's not love, even if he decides to call it by that name. One other thing. Achilles tells the embassy about the prophecy concerning him, and nobody reacts. Nobody really responds to it, expresses disbelief. Signs from the gods and prophecies are fairly commonplace, and they always get a reaction, positive or negative, from those who hear of them or observe them. So, since there's no comment on this at all, I wonder if it's common knowledge among everyone that Achilles has this prophecy surrounding him. And if it is common knowledge, then as Agamemnon offers Achilles all of this treasure, all of these weapons, these slaves, his own daughter as a bride, does he do so knowing that if Achilles returns to battle, he'll die, so he won't have to give any of it in the end anyway? It doesn't really matter in the end for the story. It's an empty offer even without this issue, but it's interesting, and it paints Agamemnon in an even worse light than before. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked what you saw here and you learned something new, please like this video and comment below to let me know what it was. And as always, if you enjoyed this kind of video and you want to see more of it, please hit the subscribe button. See you next time.